welcome to Positive Read-Ins. Today I'd like to explore nostalgia, my nostalgia, specifically by looking back at the early works that I've read, or one early work that I read, and how that work had a bigger impact on me than I thought it did. I didn't read a lot as a kid, and it wasn't until high school that I first started reading more serious literature and short stories, and even then, it took a while for me to get to kind of really get the reading fever, say. So one of the first works I remember reading, however, was Araby by James Joyce, and this came out of his first collection or his only collection of short stories, The Dubliners. Later, I went on to read just about all of his works. And I remember a friend telling me the short stories were as good as he got. I didn't necessarily believe my friend at the time, but now, certainly looking back on all of James Joyce's work, I think I definitely agree with that. I think this is where to begin if you want to read James Joyce, and I think this is definitely his most accessible. And Araby might be a great story to begin with. It's quite short, only about maybe 6 pages. And it's simple. It's a story about a boy who is trying to impress a girl and feels kind of let down by the end of that. And as I try to remember why I was attracted to this story when I read it, really, it had to do, like most stories, it has to do with the feeling you get when you read these stories. There's some feeling there, some connection that you feel that the writer is maybe describing something that you have experienced before, even if you didn't actually experience that, but you've experienced that feeling before. And this story has that, both. I'd say throughout the story, both the feeling of being kind of attracted to this slightly older girl who doesn't really, a friend's sister who doesn't really care so much about him, and also the feeling of letdown at the end. So I want to begin actually looking at the story. I think one of the things I really like about this story is just the atmosphere that's set, and that's set really in the third paragraph, and I think it's worth reading. It's very beautifully written. And I'll just read some of this. Again, maybe this is because of my upbringing, but this really connected with me, and it seemed like an environment that I grew up in and I could relate to, and I like that feeling of this, the feeling of this setting. So let me just read here. When the short days of winter came, dusk fell before we had all eaten our dinners. When we met in the street, the houses had grown somber. The space of sky above us was the color of ever-changing violet, and towards it, the lamps of the street lifted their feeble lanterns. The cold air stung us, and we played till our bodies glowed. Particularly that, I quite love that line, playing until our bodies glowed, this idea of like being so cold that you're kind of shining forth. Our shouts echoed in the silent street. The career of our play brought us through the dark, muddy lanes behind the houses where we ran the gauntlet of the rough tribes, from the cottages to the dark doors of the dark, dripping gardens, where odors arose from the ash pits to the dark odorous stables, where a coachman smoothed and combed the horse or shook music from the buckled harness. And the two great things to point out there, obviously that alliteration of back doors of the dark, dripping gardens, and shook music from the buckled harness. This idea of kind of, again, I don't know horses so much, but this kind of grabbing this harness of it, and it jingles. It has bells on it. So that's kind of this opening world that we get, and like I said, it's a very homely image, and I'm attracted to that, maybe nostalgically. But even at the time when I read it as a kid, there was something about that. Now, shortly after that, within this same paragraph, we find the narrator's kind of object of interest, which is Mangan's sister. I don't think we even get her name, but we see When she first comes out, she's described as her dress swinging, her kind of long hair, and we have him looking at her. And we know already there's an interest there. And then, again, another great detail that comes right in the next paragraph has to do with, again, things that maybe young kids would do. So he's waiting for her in the morning, waiting for her to come out so he can kind of walk with her even though he doesn't talk to her. And so I just want to read this part too. He says, "Every morning I lay on the floor in the front parlor watching her door. The blind was pulled down to within an inch of the sash so that I could not be seen. When she came out on the doorstep, my heart leaped. I ran to the hall, seized my books, and followed her. I kept her brown figure always in my eye, and when we came near the point at which our ways diverged, I quickened my pace and passed her. This happened morning after morning. I had never spoken to her except for a few casual words, and yet her name was like a summons to all my foolish blood." So again, we get a kind of an innocent love story, a young boy who's watching her just so he can go out at the same time, even though he doesn't actually have enough, courage to speak with her. Now this sets the scene. We got this great set-in that I think a lot of people can connect with. And we've got this, of course, this scenario that I think is just about universal, this attraction and fear kind of wrapped in one. Now, eventually what comes out about, and this is where the title Araby comes from, there's a bazaar, kind of like a circus kind of fair that comes to town. She can't go, he can. And he finally speaks to her and tells her that, okay, I will get you something, and that's where that's where we're going to kind of move to by the end. One other details I want to point out though too, which I think is really excellent by James Joyce, even though he doesn't give us that much details of Mengen's sister, he gives us these subtle ones. So we know we have this long hair, we have this brown figure, as I think he said. One part when she's actually speaking, it says, while she spoke, she turned a silver bracelet round and round her wrist. She could not go, she said, because there would be a retreat that week in her convent. So we've got this kind of nervous tension, this nervous action that she's doing with her bracelet, or maybe bored. We don't know how to interpret that. Maybe bored by talking to the boy, or maybe nervous as well. So I thought that was a really nice detail as well, to kind of show a lot about these characters without actually telling too much. Okay, and as I said, this brings us to kind of near the end, which is again is a simple story. But by the end, he gets to the market, but it's too late. His father came home so late, but he did get the money and he ran out. And he's in this kind of bustling street scene, which would be very alien to any scene that I would know. But again, I think for the readers, we're attracted to the mission of this young boy, this kind of mission to buy something. He doesn't even know what he's going to buy, so he can give to this girl and hopefully impress her. Okay, so we get to this end here. He says, "I lingered before her stall." This is kind of the one of the last stalls that's open. "Though I knew my stay was useless, to make my interest in her wares seem the more real. Then I turned away slowly and walked down the middle of the bazaar. I allowed the 2 pennies to fall against the 6pence in my pocket. I heard a voice call from one end of the gallery that the light was out. The upper part of the hall was now completely dark. Gazing up into the darkness, I saw myself as a creature driven and derided by vanity, and my eyes burned with anguish and anger." And that's how it ends. I remember reading this, back in high school and not really getting it. He goes out there, he's going to buy something, doesn't buy something, and he looks up into this darkness and he feels, as it says here, a creature driven and derided by vanity. I'm not sure if I even knew what vanity was at that time. And my eyes burned with anguish and anger. And so it ends with this feeling of disappointment and anger, which I didn't really get at the time. But certainly later in life, I certainly did understand this, and that's what kind of brought me back to the story and reminded me. So this young boy, this is the moment where he sees kind of maybe the littleness in what's propelling him, what's exciting him. He knows he likes this girl, but maybe his ways of trying to impress her, he sees that are kind of empty and shallow. So that's where it ends, with some disappointment there. So again, a simple story, but I think it has a great setting, some subtle details to bring out nuances in the characters, and it ends with a kind of an ambiguous message, but one that gets us thinking. So I think it's a great model for a good short story. Hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please like it and subscribe. Thank you for watching Positive Readings.